We're live
We're back.
this Monday to talk about rule number 9
Yes.
from the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And rule number 9 is assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Assume that the person you're listening to might know something you don't. You know, we all the time we say you can really learn something new from anybody.
Yes.
And so it's an interesting rule because he's saying go in with that perspective. Assume you can learn something here.
Absolutely. I was talking to my pool guy because we're changing pool guys. The guy that we've had for 17 years is wanting to spend more time with his family. His name is Jeffrey, and we miss him. Everybody knows him in the family. When he comes over to clean the pool, it's a big thing for the kids. And I was talking to the new guy, and he saw the welding helmet and he says, "You weld?" And I go, "Well, I'm learning." And he said, and these are his words, and it brought me to the rule. Um, we always need to learn something new, and learning something new every day is a good thing. I mean, he literally said that,
Yeah.
and he's my pool guy, you know? So, and he's young, he's got a lot of wisdom, and
Yeah.
so does Jeffrey. He's going to spend more time with his family, you know? And let's, after going through the rule,
Uh-huh.
okay? If you look at what he says, assume that the person you are listening to. I kept misquoting this rule for a long time, saying, hey, assume that the person you're speaking to
We're talking to.
or
Yeah.
talking to,
No.
you know, might know something you don't. But that's not what he's saying. And after going through the rule and listening to his definition of listening, I'll never get it wrong again because he is spot on listening. Listening, he says, is extremely dangerous because if we listen to someone else, we might see that our point of view is not correct.
Yeah.
And it could take us into the abyss of, oh, I got to change my mind now. So,
You run
the
that
rule
risk if you're genuinely listening,
the rule
genuinely
is
paying attention.
assume the person you are listening to
Yeah.
might know something you don't know.
It's a good rule to go in. I mean, especially with people that you know that have experience or something. You can learn so much from them. Someone that for example, we got together with a family member that retired after 40 something years
Correct.
working in uh huge uh plants, right? Production plants.
Production plants, bottling plants, yeah.
And so all I'm going to do is listen to that person about their experience because I have zero experience in a production plant, and we're talking about plants that have produced, they're producing, they run 24 hours a day, right? So you're producing hundreds of millions of dollars of
Oh,
products,
I forget how many how many bottles of,
bottles.
I think it's like 100,000 in a day or,
No, I think
well,
it's more.
they have 9 plants, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
okay, so I don't know.
Anyways, it's a
Yeah, it's
huge number.
huge. It's a
And so
huge, yeah,
all I wanted to do was hear their perspective,
right.
his perspective, which I respect very much. And those instances, if we are doing more talking, and I've noticed, and sometimes I'm gonna ask a question because I try to live by this. I didn't necessarily know this was one of the rules,
Mm-hmm.
but I try to live by this. Uh, I stop myself from the way I'm asking the question because the way that you really listen is if I think most of the time is asking a question and allowing the person to explain instead of asking a question assuming something. So like, you went to your welding class. Hey, did you learn a lot in your welding class or you know, as opposed to how did your class go? What'd you guys do? And then let you explain and listen. So I'm not the an expert at it, but I think that letting the person speak and asking a question that's open ended where they can share is
Oh,
the best way to go.
yeah, you mentioned something that stuck with me in one of our other podcasts. I don't know which one at the moment. And you said this, the best salesman is the one that listens more than he speaks.
Yeah.
And I think that's very powerful. The best salesperson, okay? Saleswoman, salesman, the best salesperson is the one that listens a lot more than he or she speaks. And I agree.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that at one of the podcasts, and you you hit the nail on the head on that.
Yeah, there's this idea that a salesman, especially in like movies and stuff, is the guy that's always talking, talking, talking.
You can talk your way out of a sale.
Yeah.
That's happened to me
Yeah.
both ways.
Yeah.
When I've been selling and when I've been buying.
And when Peterson gets into like a therapist, he talks about his role as a therapist
Right.
is there to listen, and genuine conversation is more
Genuine conversation.
listening
Mm-hmm.
than speaking.
Yeah,
So it's more listening than anything and paying attention. That's what he said. Genuine conversation is mostly listening and paying attention. But that doesn't only apply to what he was giving the example of his role of a therapist. I'm sorry, a psychologist.
clinical psychologist.
Yeah, a psychologist. In therapy, right? With a patient, it also applies to sales.
Big time.
It also applies to other interactions that we have.
For sure.
If you're trying to get something done, whether it's with family or a spouse, and you need to organize things, you can really hear them out. It's mostly listening.
For sure. Mandela said that his father was a chieftain and that he remembers prior to going to jail that his father, even though he was the chief of the tribe, he would be the last one to speak. And it was a circular formation that they got into. And his father would be the last person to speak because he wanted to listen to everybody else's point of view. Because if he, as the chief, gives out the point of view that he has first, he could potentially eschew
Yeah.
everybody, at the table. And I thought that was brilliant. He was the last one to speak, and I think he didn't speak that much, but whatever he said was powerful, was strong, direct,
Yeah.
in charge. But he had already listened to the views of all other 8 people that potentially could have been there, and that was Mandela's dad. Um, I think it's really important. Um, yeah, he goes into it big time. It's interesting because he's saying, look, he's always got this thing about chaos,
Mm-hmm. In
right?
order.
Yeah, and order. And he says that there's one place in there where he says, well, look, you can listen to the person, and then you can potentially have one foot in uh, the reserve area where you know that you're fine and protected, and then the other foot in the chaos of, because he says, you don't know where the psychotherapy is going to take you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting for me. um these folks have a huge responsibility on their hands,
Yeah.
because if they have their preconceived ideas thrown onto the patient, that will definitely uh take the patient in a different direction.
Sure.
It's really
Because
interesting.
that patient is coming to them for their help,
Right,
and so that clinician, or that, yeah, the psychologist can, if they, because we all have bias,
right,
we can guide the person. But he used the example of Sigmund Freud, that Sigmund Freud would have his patients, let's say, lay down looking straight up at the ceiling, and
And
and it,
not look at him.
and not look at Freud, as they shared everything that they needed to share, and so they weren't getting any input from him. It was
Right.
purely them speaking, because he believed that the input, that the clinician, the reaction of the face, the body language, all that would affect how the patient felt.
And I think he's right on cue. I don't know if Freud's method was the best. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm in no position to judge anything because I
it's
don't know anything about it.
yeah,
Um, but I play poker, and when you're at the poker table, every move, every twitch, every eye blink, everything. Some of these guys that are winning the
yeah,
millions and millions of dollars say that when you're at the table, every instant, every move, every reaction gives up information.
sure.
And it's how you interpret the information that, um, you either win or lose. And as you well know, the best hand in poker doesn't always win.
Yeah.
It depends how you play it.
An example, you got somebody, let's say, that's kind of not that good of a player.
Okay?
They have an excellent hand. They're betting, and they, throughout the previous games, they hadn't been checking their hand so much. But now, after, they're very excited. They're checking their hand constantly, because they have a great hand and they can't wait to win it. Because that might be a sign, right?
Get out.
Get out. Maybe he does have a good hand, but you got to read the person, and you take that gamble, and that's what Peterson's talking about: chaos and order.
And
Yeah,
also the
he's
way they're betting. Because if you got a good hand and you've been very conservative and then all of a sudden you're betting
yeah,
in a different manner, that's throwing you, that's you're revealing that you have a very good hand, so potentially everybody um, will fold,
yeah.
you know?
How do you know when to
I don't.
I was gonna say, how do you know, like, so he's saying that assume the person that you're listening to. Um, but what if, are there instances where maybe you don't, and let's say you cut a certain conversation because it's not, let's say, one that's stimulating in any way, or you're learning anything? Are there instances where you can kind of feel that out?
Well, I think time is a commodity that we all have that's extremely precious. And I've come across people that will talk your ear off, and um they mean well, but at some point I need to cut that because um it fringes in my point of view on disrespect. I want to get something out of every interaction. And maybe I've been told before that's very selfish, okay? Um, but I want to get some value out of speaking with you. I
Yeah,
want to get some value out of doing something with a person. I'm always in search for, growth and learning, and there's nothing wrong with that, I think. But um, when you come across these folks that talk your brains out and they don't even allow you the slightest input, that's a one-way ticket. I'm not interested in that.
yeah,
So I do cut that off. Um, I give them a little time and then I just say I've had enough and
yeah. It's got to be an
I cut it off
exchange.
quick. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's got to be an exchange. You got to allow the other person. Like, for example, he talks in here about the person that is listening, however, is super anxious to get into the speaking portion of this. And then he questions, are you truly listening to your patient? If you want to speak, if you're so anxious to speak, are you truly listening?
not your patient. It could
But
be anybody.
anybody,
Yeah,
potentially you're not, because you're so interested in providing your point of view
right.
that nothing else matters to you. You want the spotlight. That's another thing. You want the spotlight. Like some of these politicians, you can tell that they, what is it, revel in the spotlight.
Hmm.
They want the spotlight, and when the spotlight's on them, oh, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know that that's a good thing for character building. You know, I'm not sure. I'm no one to
I'm
say.
guilty of it, not doing the best at listening at times.
Oh yeah,
It's,
I
I think,
attest to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that because we're in the world of business and sales and talking to people, you really have to listen. Uh, Another thing that was interesting was he brought up a lecture is a conversation, and the lecturer is supposed to be engaging with the people. There's no such thing as an audience. There's individuals out there, and you have to connect with those individuals. I've done some public speaking.
Hmm.
I remember that I went to an event where my wife did. It was a huge event, and she was doing public speaking to a bunch of women, and she was constantly asking questions to the audience. And this is a long time ago, and I thought that's what Peterson's talking about, where like you're seeing the reaction of people, and the audience was they were all Hispanic, Latina women, so they were very outspoken,
Oof.
and they were.
And you were the only guy there?
I was one of the only guys, yeah. But it was cool to see that exchange. It wasn't a canned talk. And
Right,
that's
right.
what Peterson says, that even in a lecture or a public speaking event, you're presenting something, let's say, but it has to be an exchange. You
The
have to feel
danger
the
with that,
audience.
and I agree, and I think that's the best way to do it. The danger with that is that you come with up to someone that wants to steal the spotlight, you know?
You got to be able to handle
You
that
got to be
also.
able to handle that.
Yeah.
Like there's that Dan Pena has that lady that
Oh,
he
yeah, I've
says,
seen it.
"Shut up," and then Dan's got a foul mouth, and he goes,
Yeah.
shut up, shut up, no, you shut," and then she says, "No, you shut up," and then they get in.
Yeah.
I'm sure they took the microphone away from the lady
Hmm.
somehow.
Yeah.
Lady, please sit down and whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
That's what, or even a comedian where they do crowd work,
right,
they're
right.
engaging with the audience. So it's pretty cool how it's a conversation.
I think comedians are brilliant. I
Yeah.
didn't, I didn't feel this years ago, but as I've gotten to know them more and more, especially through Joe Rogan, and I've seen some in person,
Yeah.
especially lately, I think they're brilliant. And
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson says that a lot of truth is told in the camouflage of humor.
That's why it's funny.
A lot of truth is told in the camouflage of humor.
Yeah.
And I think he's right on.
Yeah. Because when someone says a joke, they're they're on that edge of going too far, but it's true what they're saying, so you laugh because it's like, "Ooh, they said that, but it was something that was true."
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Um, I also thought of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, which when you really look into it, there's some controversy behind him, whether he actually interviewed all these people.
Oh,
But it says that I looked it up. It says he studied 500 millionaires and interviewed Carnegie, uh, um, Schwab, I think Rockefeller. I mean, he interviewed like these huge,
yeah,
huge
yeah, yeah.
tycoon guys, and at least he claims to have done that, right? And then he writes the book Think and Grow Rich. And so in those interviews, the only way that he's able to get all that information and put it into a book is he had to obviously be a good listener. And
For
so I
sure.
thought that was interesting because you could be around very successful people, but if you're not good, and we've seen interviews where, like a podcast or an interview, it's hard to watch because the person interviewing is not listening. They just want to get their point across, and sometimes I change it.
Me too. I go into a podcast because I want to listen to the point of view of the person that they are interviewing. I don't go into the podcast necessarily because of the person that's doing the interview.
I agree.
Now, with Joe Rogan, it's different. I admire the man very much, and I think he's also very smart. And he brings out the best in his interviews from the person he's actually speaking to. Okay? But if I'm going to
You
listen to
know,
the guy that's doing the interview, that's not what I tuned in for, you know?
yes, I agree. We're doing the 12 rules for life, and obviously I really think Peterson has a lot of good things to say. We're also students of Robert Greene. And there's an interview you can go back where Jordan Peterson interviewed Robert Greene.
Oh, that's right.
I gotta say, it was hard to watch some of it because Peterson wasn't letting Robert Greene finish his thought.
I am, you know what? I agree with you.
Yeah. And it's a positive this is a positive criticism because I think in other interviews also Peterson's really good at, and we can get into how he says you summarize what the person just said, and then you are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you was a
No, everything
okay.
is good.
You summarize what the person just said, and then you see if you got it right, and the person can correct you or not. And with Robert Greene and Peterson, he kept cutting off Greene, and it wasn't the best interview
No, I
of
turned it off.
Peterson.
I actually turned it off. I didn't watch it.
I did watch the whole thing. I've seen it a
No,
couple times.
I didn't.
But the comments also, if you look at it, everyone's saying you keep cutting off. And Robert Greene is kind of a soft spoken. Peterson is stronger in his voice. And so he actually lets Peterson kind of cut him off. He's okay with him being cut off. And he did a very good job as the interviewee, I think. I just thought
Yeah,
it was interesting.
yeah. I I don't know how many they've had, but I remember
We'll
one in
link it in the
particular.
description too.
Yeah, I remember one in particular, which, you know, as much respect as I have for Jordan Peterson, okay, and I think he's a brilliant, one of the most brilliant minds of today. It was annoying, and I turned it off because I felt that Jordan Peterson was not letting Robert Greene finish, and I felt that he was giving us his point of view, but I wanted to hear Robert Greene's point of view.
Yeah.
And as much respect as I have for this man, I said, you know what, this is annoying. It became annoying, and I turned it off.
It's a good
So
example.
I lose for not listening to it.
No, but it's a good example of like, look, he wrote this book, and yet even in that instance, he wasn't following this rule 9.
Yeah, well,
And
none
we're
of
all
us,
guilty of it.
well, none of us are perfect.
Yeah, this is just kind of a positive criticism.
Another thing that I learned here is the value of these clinical psychologists in helping people out. And
Mm.
I knew before, okay, that they play a big role, okay, in the healing of certain things. But in one part, he says, hey, you know what? The psychologist has to be very careful in whether or not you call your patient or your client a victim, or you just write out, tell your client, look, you weren't a victim, you're just a mess and you need to fix yourself up. Or, and he says, if you, one of those were A and B, where you called your patient or your client a victim, or where you tell them, look, you just gotta need to get your house in order, get yourself together, you need to work on yourself, because they're two different pathways.
And he's saying you shouldn't do either.
Right. I mean, he says, look, if you listen, sometimes the client, I'm having an issue between client and patient.
The
Some
patient,
Sometimes the patient will tell you exactly what's wrong with them. If you listen, they'll tell you exactly what's wrong with them, and
right?
you'll get to the answer because they give it to you.
Because he said you asked the patient, "What do you think?" Right? What
Right.
do you think happened? And those are things that he's letting. I thought this was interesting. He says thinking is listening to yourself. That's a quote from the book. Thinking is listening to yourself. And so what he's saying is when you're talking something out, you haven't really thought it out necessarily. Like, when you're explaining something, you haven't necessarily thought it out yet. You're working it out as you're speaking. And when you're recalling something, you're also figuring out what to remove from the story that's not as important and get to the moral of the story. So, like, if I were to ask you, how was it growing up in Cuba? We're not going to be sitting here for a week, you explaining every single detail. So, you're going to remove everything that you don't think is necessarily uh, pertinent to explaining the moral of how it was you growing up in Cuba. And we can have that conversation in a shorter amount of time.
Sure.
We talk about it. Some people like to go through every single detail, and maybe in some instances you have to of a story, and then other people go a little bit more straight to the point of the story. This is the moral of the story, because you don't have. And he said, like, with that one patient he had that had gone through a serious trauma
Yeah.
multiple times,
Yeah.
he said that he didn't have, I forgot what amount of time he said they would need to resolve the issue. They didn't have that, and he didn't choose A or B and give that to her and say, this is what happened to you. He said, I don't know what happened to you. And she ended up leaving him as a patient. Maybe she was looking for somebody to say, this is what happened.
Right. But then there's, it's a play on words, but um, he says, look, a good therapist will tell you the truth about what he thinks versus what he thinks the truth is. It's a play on words, but it's powerful because so a good therapist will tell you the truth about what the therapist thinks versus
Not tell
what
you what he
versus
thinks.
what he thinks the truth is.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
because you already made your decision. Yeah, it's they have
Oh, yeah.
a huge responsibility in the treatment of these folks and whatever
Yeah.
horrible experience um they've gone through.
He also brought up another psychologist named Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that Rogers believed that it takes courage to listen, and we find ourselves compelled to evaluate. Every time somebody's sharing something with us, we always feel like we have to evaluate it and give whatever answer or our thoughts on it instead of just listening to the person.
Right.
Um, I'm
Sp-
guilty of that.
well, who isn't? I mean,
I really like what he says, summarize what people have said first and then ask them if you have it correct before moving on.
right.
I do have to say, in
I've never
Peterson's
done that.
in Peterson's interviews, he does a good job at that.
Okay.
He
I've
does a
never
good job.
done that. You know?
Uh,
I'm assuming that I'm listening and I'm understanding what is being told to me. And well, I think that's
oh,
a
you
great
don't restate anything.
no.
Yeah.
I
Do I have it correct? Did I get this right?
That's a fantastic point that
Yeah.
I should use moving forward.
Um, yeah, I think I was talking to my wife about that, and she said, in her practice, which is in the nutrition world, that's something like common practice that she's constantly doing, because the person may be saying, "Hey, I don't have time to eat, so I just go eat junk food." And then but they may be saying it in a different way or whatever, and so she has to make sure, is this correct that you're saying you don't have, but you have to summarize it, not use the exact words, because the person might say, no, actually, no, it's not that, it's this, and they clarify it. And that's really important if you're going to try and help somebody solve an issue, like eat healthier or whatever the case. You have to find out what's actually the problem here, because these
Right.
are behavioral changes.
That's right.
It's not just giving you a medication, it's a behavioral.
Yeah. Another thing that I liked about this rule is that he threw like a rock at us because he says, look, Um, if you're reading this book, you are probably a privileged person.
Hmm.
Okay?
You can
Why?
read.
Why? Well, first of all, you can read, which means you've learned that skill. And second, you have time to read. So you're definitely privileged because you know how to read and you have time to read, but you have no idea how many generations it took to get you to this point. So,
Like your ancestors,
uh,
what they did.
and he says, a little gratitude from you might be in order. And
Yeah.
I'm listening to this thing, and because he says, you are privileged because you can read, you know how to read, you have that skill, you learned it, but you also have time to read this book. How many people have time to read a book? Not many. Everybody's in the rat race. So you're privileged,
Yeah.
but you also don't have any idea how many generations it took to get you to where you are today to be able to do this. So get off your high horse and show a little gratitude. I love it. The man is something else. I've got circles and scratches and all kinds.
One thing that I could relate to in the book, he also said that when you're, let's say talking to your wife or girlfriend or partner, and he says that women tend to want to state the problem, like what the actual issue is,
Mm-hmm.
and that men many times jump to try and solve that problem without actually hearing the whole problem out, and that
Mm-hmm.
creates an issue. Um, because let's say the woman is still trying to like lay out the problem, what is actually the problem, and you're just trying to cut cut it the conversation and just solve whatever you think is the problem, and it looks as if you actually don't really want to hear what the problem is. You have a problem,
Let's
like,
solve it.
yeah, I'm guilty of that.
Me too. Me too. This morning, I was talking to your mom, and she brought up an idea, and you know, I immediately went to the solution, and she wasn't able to finish.
You
I
have to
immediately
let
went
the person hear the other person out.
right. I'll go back and hear her.
um
He's also defining what memory is,
yes.
you know?
Yeah.
I, memory, when you tell me do you remember this or whatever? He says, and you can repeat it back. I leave it there. But he goes a step further and he says, look, memory is not just, pulling out of the bag what has transpired. It's also remembering so that you can change the future. That's the purpose of memory. Memory. The purpose of memory is remembering so that you can change the future
Yeah.
in a better way. Make
So
the
you're
future
prepared for
better.
the future,
Yeah,
and also so that you're not, I think, I believe you're not going to make
the
the
same
same
mistake.
mistake.
Exactly.
It's not simply just to retell it, like you're saying.
Exactly. It's
um I have a friend that is in the dating game right now. They're
okay.
dating,
Okay.
and they went on a date, and that the girl in that uh dinner was asking him questions like back to back to back to back to back, and that they felt that it was a little bit
Too much.
too much. And so I find it interesting because, like, genuine conversation is an exchange. I ask you, you ask me, it flows, right? But he was sharing that it didn't feel that way. It felt just like there was no chance to even ask a question back because you get hit with another one, kind of thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm no psychologist, but I would say that would be no good.
Well, it that's not really,
Give it another shot.
yeah.
Go out again
Yeah,
and
but
be truthful. Just say, hey, in our first,
well, in fairness, they said, hey, these are a lot of questions,
a
kind of
lot
thing.
of questions. Can I
So
breathe? Can
yeah.
I come up for air?
Yeah, I think that
I'm not in the dating game, so I don't really know.
no, but like when you were first dating, getting to know anybody, you have to do a lot of listening, and you're actually genuinely interested in this person and what do they do? Like what do you like? What is it that you enjoy doing? And like, if you want to be romantic or whatever, and they tell you, "Oh, I really like going to
The movies,
yeah, the movies, let's say the
the
movies,
beach,
the beach," then
dancing.
you plan a date to do those things.
Yeah.
And that means you were listening, and that's very nice and that's romantic. If they tell you, "I don't like going to the movies, I really like going to the beach," and you take them to the movies, you weren't listening. So that's not gonna go well. Anyways, I think that when you're first getting to know somebody, you're genuinely curious and you do that. For some reason, with people that we know for a long, long time, sometimes that can go away. But you can always learn something new from even somebody that you've known your whole life,
Or somebody that you don't know.
or somebody that you don't know. But let's say the person who's been in your life for 50 years,
Okay.
you can still learn something new from them.
Oh, absolutely. Look, you can learn something from.
Like you say it all the time, don't hang me up on a frame.
That's right.
Why do you say that? You're saying it because people sometimes put you in a box. They
That's
say,
right.
"Oh, Pablo reacts this way. Pablo is this way. He doesn't like going to the beach." Yeah, but what if now at you're 65 years old, you like going to the beach?
Well, no. What if I want to go to the beach that day?
What if you want to go to the beach that day? I'm giving just an example, right?
Right. So, um,
But if you listened, if you gave the person the benefit of the doubt, you would
let me give you
learn.
an example that while preparing for this rule, like I've said many times, I am on social media way too much for my own good. Okay. There was this thing that came up on social media. It's less than 60 seconds, but it's impactful. The guy comes on and says, you know what? One time, a complete stranger um, that I met in an airport, in a bathroom, in an airport bathroom, changed my life completely. And I don't even know his name, who he is, or what. But what happened is this: they were both in the bathroom, they're washing their hands. The guy to his left is in a three-piece suit, dressed to kill. He finishes washing his hands and he gets napkins and cleans the faucet and the area where he sat and the sink and everything. He cleaned it.
Wow.
He took the time to clean it. And so this gentleman says, "Hey, how long have you been working here?" As a joke. And the gentleman turned to him very nicely and said, it's always nice to leave something better than when you found it, better than how you found it. It's nice to leave something in a better state, better than how you found it. Have a great day." And he walked out. When he finished washing his hands, he says that he got napkins and he cleaned the sink, he cleaned the faucet, excuse me, the faucet and the area and everything, and he's been doing it ever since.
Wow.
And he says, he changed my life completely because wherever I go, I try to leave that particular place or that particular person better than when I found them.
Wow.
And he was a total stranger in a three-piece suit.
See, that's
Can you
the
believe that?
that's a super cool story.
It's a super cool story.
And it's an example of if you're listening, you potentially can change your mind on things and your life could be different.
Yeah. It was impactful for this man
Yeah.
and it changed his life forever. And he's a total, he doesn't even know who the guy is. And there are stories like that.
Yeah.
That's what I like about the internet.
That's a very cool
There's
story.
very beautiful stuff that goes on. But anyway, getting back to the rule.
I wanted to talk about religion and politics
Oof, go
because
for it.
well, Peterson is saying that with religion and political conversations, they're usually it's not genuine listening that's happening.
With religion and politics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not like. I right now there's a lot going on in the world,
Yep.
and I asked people, like I met a gentleman that's from Lebanon. So I want, how is it over there in that world? I met somebody, I was talking to somebody from El Salvador. How is it now that things, they say things have changed? You know, they go often. And then this person was, uh, they had shared, another buddy shared with me, they had studied recently the Middle East and Israel and Palestine, all these different parts. So I genuinely want to know and learn, like, what do you know? What could I learn from you? But I think we go into a lot of these conversations, whether it's religion or politics, already with our, let's say, our set values,
Preconceived ideas. Yep.
preconceived ideas, and we're not really willing to hear the other side, or maybe a lot, maybe we're wrong on something. Maybe we got wrong information
Yeah.
growing up, or who knows. But if you don't allow the person to actually speak and hear them out, then and that it seems like that happens a lot with politics and religion.
Yeah, I agree. Politics and religion is an area that I am terrified to get into conversation with. And maybe that makes me a coward. Okay? So, some people, politics and religion, because, and I come from Cuba, which was a communist country, kicked my parents out, me too, a
It
lot of
still is.
suffering. Huh?
It still is a communist country.
Right. And so, you know, it may be difficult to set some of this, because if you're going to come and talk to me how good communism is, I don't know that I would perceive it very well. So I'd rather walk away.
That's
Maybe I'm a
interesting.
coward. Maybe that makes me a coward.
Well, you lived it, and the person speaking to you
You don't know.
maybe hasn't lived it, maybe
Maybe not.
has,
There's
but
a not, again, on social media, there's a lot of stuff. There's a
yeah,
guy that came out, he's from Cuba, and he's gave this big old spiel. This was like a 6-minute video, but it was extremely interesting. Basically, he's telling the people from Spain, hey guys, wake up. This is socialism, one skip and a hop away from communism. And he's telling the people of Spain, and I think that video went, I don't know if it went viral or not, but he's giving suggestions of what's going on and open your eyes, blah, 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 because
right,
apparently, and I don't know the state of Spain
right.
right now, but according to this guy, you know,
I've met some Cubans, older Cubans that went through. I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular that he even said he was put in prison and everything when the revolution happened in 1959 with
uh-huh,
Fidel Castro. He spent 10 years in prison,
wow,
and then he's got to be in his 80s. Yeah, he's in his 80s, and he said, you know what's happening in California, the signs are there. And this is somebody who lived
and went
the
to jail.
and went to jail and saw the change between what Cuba was before 59 and then after, because he was already, born
Right.
before and lived some of it. Was jailed. So he was old enough, I guess, to be jailed.
Well, he said something against the government that didn't jive, and he's
Yeah.
lucky to be alive, probably.
So
Yeah, he's
I'll
lucky to be alive,
oh, for sure.
for sure. Because Castro got rid of a lot of people, a lot of people.
So it's interesting when somebody who lived something like that says, "Hey, what's happening here?" Now maybe they are hypersensitive because of what happened and the trauma in their life.
Right.
It's possible,
And
but
that
the
could be my position too.
point is that I'll listen to them,
Right.
and I'll listen to
We should.
I'll try to listen to both. Like I like what Dana White says, where he says, "I don't care what your politics are. I don't judge a man by who they vote for or who what side of the aisle they're on. I don't judge a man for that." And he's saying I judge him for, are they a nice guy, their character,
And can they fight?
and can they fight. But that's interesting because a lot of us do judge based on who you vote for and who, I mean, look at the past couple years have been, there's
Brutal.
a lot of judgment going
Of
on.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, anything else you wanted to throw in?
No,
There's,
I think the rule
yeah,
is tremendous, you know? I mean, assume the person that you are listening to might know something that you don't know. For
yeah.
sure.
Um,
I love it.
the unknown, this is a quote from the book, the unknown makes a better friend than the known.
Wow.
And I like that because, I want to learn something new. I'm going to
Right.
gravitate towards that. The no, but it is the opposite of uh what's this quote go of the devil that you know is better than the devil that you don't.
Right.
This is the opposite. The unknown makes a better friend than the known.
Wow. Perfect.
Solid rule. Rule number 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Let's practice that today.
Let's do it.
And next week we'll do rule 10, and then we're finishing up the 12 rules for life.
We're going to have to
So,
figure out what to do after that. If
if
you guys have any suggestions, please, by all means, let us know. And thank you for following and becoming subscribers. We're having a lot of fun with it.
absolutely. Thank you.
All right.